will jump right in to the budget work session. So I'm very pleased to present City Manager's proposed FY22 operating and capital budgets. We've done things a little bit different this year in that we're combining these presentations into one. So hopefully it will clarify the choices that are available to you and the ways in which we're aligning towards your strategic goals, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Obviously, this is my second budget as your city manager, the first in what I would consider sort of a normal budget season. So last year we were on the path towards a traditional season, and then with COVID, everything got waylaid. And so there weren't a lot of choices to make about how to advance the ball on council's priorities, but certainly lots of choices on how to meet our citizens' needs, keep the community safe while going through the pandemic. I'm pleased to be here today with our new budget director, Mr. Jonathan Hobbs, who you'll hear from shortly. Jonathan comes to us with a wealth of experience, and he shares my commitment to helping City Council and the community be transparent and engaging throughout the process and help clearly illustrate the choices that are in front of Council. And so with that, we'll jump right into the presentation. So for today's agenda, I mentioned the word transparency. If there's one thing I hope you'll see out of this process is we're trying to be crystal clear with Council and the community about your choices, what's available to you on the revenue side of the equation, what's available to you on the expenditure side of the equation. But not just numbers, not just those choices, it's what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And those outcomes, as you'll see, are aligned with Council's adopted vision and our strategic anchors that we use as guiding principles as we make decisions within the organization. So really this process, there you're going to see charts and graphs and pies and all kinds of things, but the process is making sure that we align our resources to achieve Council's identified vision and our strategy that we're going to use to achieve that vision. And so hopefully with this budget, you'll see how we're starting to advance the ball on achieving those outcomes. You'll see where the community investments are specifically aimed towards achieving those outcomes, and we're going to show you a tool, particularly on the capital budgeting side, that we've developed this year to both be transparent about what we're trying to achieve, but also geographically represent for the community where those investments are taking place. We'll, of course, give you an overview of revenue, an overview of expenditures, and then we'll close with the process moving forward and some closing thoughts as we begin that process together. So as always, starting with Council's adopted vision, lots of words on the screen. I, of course, won't read all those words to you, but you spent a lot of time last year discussing this, reaffirming it, and really we anchor back to that underlined sentence. The thing we're trying to achieve together is making Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play. And then our strategic anchors, the first is based on that vision. The second is how we're going to do it. How are we going to achieve that vision is by providing outstanding service to Council, our community, our customers, and each other. And that's really anchored in our CARES principles. Being the city that cares really means something to all of us, and you're going to see some of that reflected in the choices we make. And then, of course, our budget guiding principles. We want to make sure we're fiscally responsible and sustainable. And I believe we've achieved all three. So starting with those guiding principles, you're going to see a budget based on achieving the vision, addressing our customer service needs, and then consistent with Council's budget guiding principles. And just to reorient you and remind you of those, no increase in the real estate tax. So the budget maintains the city's current tax rate. We do not add new fees, so this budget contains no new fees. We do not supplant losses in state or federal funds with local funds unless you specifically make the choice to do so. So this budget does not supplant any losses in state or federal revenues. And then we only deviate from those guiding principles if we are addressing council strategic priorities. So if you recall, this was the new principle that you added last year at the first retreat, and this budget contains no deviations from the first three guiding principles. However, as you're going to see in my closing remarks, there are big choices on the horizon, and it is possible that you'll have to make deviations from those first three principles in order to satisfy those choices. And so what you'll see in the series of work sessions coming up is a variety of ways to address all of the needs and all of the choices facing council and the community. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, while the budget contains a lot of facts and figures and numbers and charts, it's really about, it's probably your principal policy, your principal expression of how do we align our resources to achieve your strategy. One of the ways that we've done this is we've made sure every CIP project is aligned to the comprehensive plan, and you're going to see that in the draft CIP. As a former planner, I was pretty surprised to see such a huge CIP for an organization and community the size of the city of Chesapeake, where we have not historically anchored those projects to achieving your comprehensive plan. And so it's one of the things we really want to do is to bring those documents into alignment. I mentioned that we have a new section of the CIP that highlights just that. We're going to talk about a new tool to be able to be transparent in showing people those CIP projects. And of course, all of the documentation that you have in the draft budgets, and hopefully the presentation today and in the upcoming work sessions will be focused on achieving our desired outcomes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to run you through the process that we used to start to make progress on council strategic priorities, and then go through some of the elements of the proposed budget.
Thanks, Chris. It's a real honor to be here this evening to present with Chris and Virginia this proposed CIP and operating budget for FY22. I want to start by taking you back to November to your retreat, and you saw this exact same slide when we began to talk about the process that we were going to undertake as we move forward in the FY22 budget process. And when we started the process, we asked our department directors to review their programs and services, and we asked them to ask three questions. What should we start doing in an effort to align our programs and services with City Council strategic anchors? What should we stop doing? Are there programs and services that we're providing that are ineffective and not achieving those anchors and those outcomes? And what should we continue doing? Obviously, there's a number of programs and services that we provide that achieve those outcomes. So those are things that we would want to continue. So for each of those, I just want to walk you through a couple of examples of each. Obviously, these lists are not comprehensive. So what did we stop doing in this budget? One of the things that we stopped doing is paying rent on the 411 building. Council may recall that we acquired that building this fiscal year, and that allowed us to stop paying rent for the registrar's office, and we've redirected those savings to other places in the budget. Something else that we've included in the FY22 proposed budget is we've not completely stopped budgeting for attrition or using vacancy savings, but we've certainly reduced the amount of vacancy savings that we're using. In the current fiscal year, we're using about $17.3 million of attrition in order to balance the budget. Now, that's a much higher number than we would normally use here in Chesapeake, and a lot of that is due to the impacts of COVID. We had to do that in order to maintain the programs and services that we provide to our citizens. So we've reduced that number from 17.3 across all funds, about 15.4 in the general fund, down to about $10 million in the general fund for fiscal year 22. Something else that we've stopped doing, and this goes directly to those guiding principles and that not supplanting guiding principle. We had anticipated state funding for Mount Pleasant Road widening phase 2, about $4.8 million. That funding did not materialize from the state, so therefore we cannot complete that project as the scope currently outlines because we have a $4.8 million gap in the project. And something that I've done throughout the presentation, so you'll be able to see specifically the details of these projects. If it's a CIP project, I've noted the page number of the project in your CIP on the presentation. So if you want to go back later and take a look at the details of any of these projects, you can do so. So again, like I said, that created about a $4.8 million gap, and certainly council could choose to address that with local funding. So what did we continue doing in this budget? A couple of important CIP projects. We added $600,000 in FY23 to continue in investing in the relocation and development of the Cornland School and developing that as a park amenity. Something else that we're doing is improving stormwater infrastructure in the Pughesville area. We added additional funding in FY22 to continue to do that work and alleviate some of those drainage issues being experienced by those citizens. We also are fully funding or providing all of our state and federally mandated programs and services, and we're also meeting all of our contractual obligations as a city. So what did we start doing? And I'll talk more specifically about some of these a little later in the presentation. We added a new Medic 10 unit in the fire department. We also significantly enhanced some of our cybersecurity initiatives in the information technology department. We've added a new residential traffic calming program in the transportation section of the CIP. And we're also adding a new urban forestry program in our Parks and Recreation department. So over the next several slides, I'm going to talk to you a lot about outcomes. And Chris used this word a lot. You're going to hear me use this word a lot. Outcomes. What impact are we having on the community? What impact, what are the citizens getting for their tax dollars? So when we say outcomes, it's the impact on the customer. It's what the community can expect to get for these investments that they're making in these two spending plans. And for each one of these outcomes that I'm going to talk about, we've also broken down the strategic anchors into individual elements. So the first anchor, we've broken that down into the element of live, learn, work, farm, play. For the second anchor, we've just simply categorized that as customer service. And then for the third anchor, we've categorized that as fiscally sustainable. And next to each one of these outcomes, you're going to see one or even more of those elements of those strategic anchors for each of those outcomes. So one of the first things that we attempted to achieve in these two spending plans is to make it easier to conduct business with the city. And going back to what I said a minute ago, we see that as being aligned with the element of customer service, kind of that second strategic anchor. We're also adding funding to ensure that data and transactions are secure. That aligns to the live, learn, work, farm, play, fiscally sustainable, and the customer service elements. So it kind of hits all of the strategic anchors. We also wanted to ensure that facilities, equipment, and systems enable operational success. It's important that our employees work in facilities that are high functioning and that they have equipment and systems that are also high functioning that allow them to perform their jobs to the best of their ability. We also make investments geared toward improving physical and mental health. To enhance mobility and connectivity. And we also are looking to improve air quality, water quality, and the physical environment. And you can see again, we've aligned this to the live, work, farm, and play elements of your strategic anchors. Just a few more of these. Again, we've invested so that we can increase tourism. We are attempting to attract new business to Chesapeake as well as to retain existing businesses and also allow them the opportunity to expand here in the city. And we also want our citizens and guests to the city to feel safe anytime, anywhere. We have also made investments toward the preservation of life and property. We want to ensure clean drinking water is available to everyone. We've made investments in new projects to eliminate environmental contamination. And again, we want to ensure that our city assets are well maintained. So again, you can see the outcome that we're attempting to achieve, the impact we want to have on this community, and then how it aligns to your strategic anchors. So to achieve any of these outcomes, we have to have good people. So the first thing that the city manager wanted to make sure that we addressed in this budget was compensation. This budget includes $4.5 million in a reserve that is available for a general wage increase in FY22. And we have also set aside $2.25 million in funding to begin to address some of the recommendations of the pay and class study that is forthcoming. We expect that study to be completed hopefully at some point within fiscal year 22, and this $2.25 million would allow us to address some of the recommendations from that study. And like I said, all $6.75 million of that is in a reserve, and I'll talk to you a little bit later about why that's significant and important. Another investment that we're making to recruit and retain employees, a specific example, is with our motor equipment operators. Council may recall that in the FY21 budget, despite declining revenue due to COVID, you did approve salary adjustments for motor equipment operators as part of the FY21 budget. It's a very critical position in the organization in that it operates in a number of departments: public utilities, public works, central fleet. It works on stormwater projects, transportation projects, and infrastructure maintenance and construction. So the budget includes new apprentice positions in the Public Works Department. These individuals would be hired without the requisite qualifications to be a motor equipment operator. They would receive on-the-job training, be trained up so that they qualify for the position, and then they could be transitioned to the department that needs motor equipment operators. So an innovative way to try to bring in and retain employees in these critical positions. So now I've talked to you generally about some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So now I'm going to walk you through a few of those outcomes again, but talk to you about specific projects and investments that we're making in the operating budget that advance us toward those outcomes. So again, facilities, equipment, and systems enable operational success. A significant project that is fully programmed in the FY22 CIP is the replacement of the Public Works and Public Utilities operation facilities. This project is fully programmed at $36.2 million, and you can find detailed information on that project on page 97 of your CIP document. We also included an additional $4 million for the high priority renewal and replacement project. This allows us to perform maintenance on various city facilities, roofs, HVAC systems, things like that, and allows Public Works to get them on a routine maintenance cycle. We also included an additional $2 million for the dock landing station, fire station replacement. This funding was necessary to fully fund that project, and now we've included that in FY22 so that that station can be constructed. Excuse me. Preservation of life and property. We hope to achieve faster emergency response times with the new Medic 10 unit that I mentioned earlier. We've added 6 new positions in the fire department, and this new Medic unit should enhance those response times and allow the emergency responders to get to those residents more quickly. The Broadlawn Apartments Outfall Improvement Project is about $1.8 million. This is a project in the South Norfolk section of the city. It's about 1,500 linear feet of undersized and damaged stormwater piping that we will go in and replace as part of this project. Currently, the stormwater impacts not only private property, but public property, including a school. And by going in and replacing that piping, we hope to create a more efficient drainage system in that area to get the stormwater away from those properties. The Rural Road Safety Improvement Program, we've added $1 million for this. The city has about 100 miles of rural roads that don't meet current safety standards. This allows Public Works to go in and make minor modifications like pavement widening, changing the curve alignment in a roadway, as well as moving ditches in order to make those roadways safer for the traveling public. So again, we've added $1 million in that project. Improving air, water quality, and the physical environment. The first project on this list is a significant one, and you'll hear me say this a few times in this presentation. This is a great project because of multiple positive outcomes. Not only are we developing a recreational amenity, but we're also, as part of this project, constructing a new living shoreline, which is going to help with water quality improvements. So we get a recreational amenity as well as having the benefit of water quality enhancement for our stormwater. Citywide BMP restoration, again, this is for improving water quality and also creating additional capacity in our stormwater infrastructure. We've also added a new position in our Public Utilities Department to address a lead and copper mandate. It's a testing mandate coming to us from the EPA for drinking water. And I mentioned this earlier, we are also within the Parks and Rec Department creating a new urban forestry program. This was something that was specifically mentioned in the comprehensive plan, so we are addressing that goal area. And then we are also hoping to reduce sanitary sewer overflows through the Gracie Road force main relocation. Currently, this force main was located in an area that it was difficult for city staff to get to and maintain this force main. Back in 2019, I believe, we had a significant sanitary sewer overflow here, and this project will allow us to move this force main into an area where it can be more easily accessed by city staff and maintained with the goal of obviously reducing the likelihood of another sanitary sewer overflow in this area. Data and transactions are secure. The single largest increase in investment in the CIP is for this first project listed here, the tax system modernization. This project is now fully programmed at $24.75 million. Currently, the city has a legacy mainframe system that we use for our tax system, and this is going to convert that system to a modern system, and this obviously is going to impact every tax-paying resident of the city of Chesapeake, as well as a number of departments that utilize and rely on this system for the levy and collection of our most important revenue, property taxes. Another project is the Data Access and Governance Design and Implementation Project. This project goes to address the wide variety of sensitive data that we have here in the city. We have a lot of different departments that do a lot of different programs and services, have a lot of different types of sensitive data on some of our systems. This project will allow us to catalog that data, know where it's at, know who should have access to it, and more importantly, who should not have access to the data, and ensure that only the right individuals are getting to that data. We've also added funding in the information technology operating budget for a new system security engineer, as well as increased professional services funding for security. Physical connectivity. This first one, again, is a significant project. You had a presentation recently on this project. This is the Deep Creek AIW Bridge replacement. We've added an additional $850,000 to the project in FY22 to fully fund it. The $850,000 is for engineering consulting work to do inspections to ensure that we're using the right materials as required by the state and the federal government to ensure that our $20 million that the state has promised us will be fully reimbursed. So that's why we've added that $850,000 to that project. This bridge was built in 1934. It's functionally obsolete, and obviously it's also weight restricted, which causes a number of problems for public safety vehicles. They have to go around. So by replacing this bridge, obviously, again, a lot of multiple positive outcomes that come from that bridge replacement. Another project that, again, hits those multiple positive outcomes, the city sidewalk installation. We're adding $500,000 a year to add additional linear feet of sidewalk throughout the city. We're adding not only connectivity, but also a recreational amenity that walkers, joggers, bikers can use throughout the city. And then the final project on this page is the arterial and collector roadway rehabilitation project. We added $2.5 million in the out years of the CIP in fiscal year 24 and 25 to this project. This will allow us to get on hopefully a more frequent resurfacing cycle for some of our more traveled roadways. And I didn't want to leave our good friends over at the schools out of this presentation. The schools are a significant part of the city's overall budget, and obviously they've produced their own document, but wanted to highlight a few things that they are doing in FY22. They are implementing the final phase of full-day kindergarten. I believe they're adding 43 positions in their budget to implement this final phase. They're also adding 8 new positions for the Chesapeake Virtual Academy. And they're also increasing their funding in the CIP for the replacement of technology in school buses. So we haven't talked much about numbers yet, and Chris promised you some graphs and some pies, and they're coming. So here's the first one. I want to talk a little bit about the change in the operating budget from FY21 to FY22. On the city side, the budget's growing by 4.2%, operating budget 21 to 22. For the schools, it's growing by about 10.9%. And then overall, it's growing by 7.3%. Now, obviously, that 10.9 number may sound a little high. I'm going to talk to you in just a minute about what's causing that increase. But a significant part of what's causing it on the city side as well as the school side is COVID-19. When the budget was developed last year, we had no idea what the economic impact of COVID-19 would be. We drastically reduced revenues because we did not know what was going to happen. And these growth rates are off those reduced baselines for FY21. So when you see these growth rates, remember, this is off that COVID reduced base. So that's some of why the growth rates seem a little higher than they would normally be. So let's talk a little bit about what's driving that growth, and I'm going to start on the city side and then we'll move over to the school side. So I mentioned this earlier. One of the first things we had to do in the budget was buy down some of those vacancy savings that we used in FY21. I gave you this number earlier. We used $17.3 million across all funds, $15.4 million in the general fund. We've reduced that down to $10 million for FY22. So those expenditures that were backed with those vacancy savings are now backed in FY22 by current revenue. On the next bullet, the same story. We used about $8 million of general fund balance to balance the FY21 budget due to COVID. And again, in order to back those ongoing expenditures with current revenue, we had to buy down that use of fund balance that we had utilized in FY21 to make sure that we were able to keep our programs and services funded. Something else we did in FY21 to reduce the budget was we eliminated $2.5 million of funding for public safety vehicle replacement. We've added that back into the budget for FY22. So kind of the second phase of the 3 phases of growth for the city budget, we had some increased cost for existing programs and services. In order to maintain the same level of service next year that we're providing today, we had a couple of contractual increases. 2 that come to mind are in information technology for licensing and maintenance, and the medical contract at the jail for the sheriff's department. Both of those combined were over $1 million in contractual increases just to maintain our current level of service. City Council is aware we also have a 6% charter reserve, and the first 6% of every new dollar of revenue we get must go to that charter reserve. Same thing for the next line is the 12% policy reserve. So the first 18% of any new dollar of revenue that we receive immediately goes into those 2 reserves. In FY22, that equated to just about $7 million that we are sending to fund balance to fund those 2 required reserves. The other policy that City Council has that we funded for FY22 is the revenue sharing formula policy, or the revenue sharing formula agreement that we have with schools. So we had to transfer that funding to schools. And I'll show you the change there. Again, this slide shows you the budgeted contribution to schools from FY17 to FY22. And you'll note from 21 to 22, the growth of 14.2 million. Again, that growth rate is being driven off of that reduced COVID impacted revenue sharing formula number for FY21. When we do the revenue true up at the end of the year, I have a feeling that these lines are going to be much closer in sync, and it's going to look much more like a normal trend line than it does on this particular graph if the economy holds and we continue to see the performance of our revenues like we have over the first half of the current year. So then kind of the third phase was new spending, and we did very limited new spending as part of the budget and contributing to the growth on the city side. We wanted to ensure that all of that new spending was directly related to the City Council's strategic anchors, and have already talked about some of those new investments that we made as part of the FY22 budget. Did also want to talk about that funding that we set aside for compensation. If for some reason the economy does take a downturn, we don't anticipate that. So far things look really positive, but we do have that $6.75 million set aside in a reserve. The city manager can choose the timing to bring the general wage increase to City Council, can also choose the rate that he wants to bring forth to City Council for a recommendation on a general wage increase, as well as the 2.25 for the pay and class study. So this gives us flexibility. We hope we don't need flexibility. We hope that the economy continues to perform well, revenues continue to perform well, but this does allow us that flexibility by putting this funding in a reserve. So on the school side, what's driving that 10% number? A big portion of it is funding that they receive from the federal government for the CARES Act, through the CARES Act. They did not come to City Council and ask to have that funding appropriated in the current fiscal year. Instead, they decided to wait, and they're asking for the appropriation of about $20 million of CARES funding in this budget. So that's in their grant fund, but that's really driving part of that 10% increase. Something else that they've included in their budget is salary increases for teachers and other school staff. I mentioned the 43 positions for the final phase of full-day kindergarten. They're adding an additional 14 counselor positions as mandated through the standards of quality. They've requested the creation of a new athletic fund. They are also requesting the addition of some new nurse and psychologist positions that would kind of work throughout the school system, not be based in any one school, but would kind of work throughout the system. And then also they have some fleet increases in costs for their school buses, as well as increases for the Chesapeake Virtual Academy. So those are some of the factors that are driving the increase in the school's operating budget. So now let's look at the overall operating budget, and this slide simply shows the total FY22 proposed operating budget is $1.26 billion. You see that the schools make up 48% of that figure, while the city makes up the remaining 52%. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the total net operating budget for both the city and schools. This next slide shows you that same information, just broken down a little differently. You still see the 48% going to education, but this slide breaks down the city portion of the funding by the functional areas as they're outlined in the city's budget. Of note is the economic and environmental vitality section at 17.9% of the city's total, and then public safety being 14.5% of that 52% of the total budget. And then looking at the data just a little bit differently, this is that same data in just a tabular form, so you can actually see the numbers. And again, the total net city operating budget is $655.7 million, with the schools at about $606 million, for a total of $1.26 billion overall. Moving over to the school side and showing you their operating budget by fund. Their total operating fund is $508.2 million. You see the remaining school funds there, including the new school athletic fund. And then once we back out, that means their total gross budget is about $636 million. We back out the internal service fund that they have and their interfund transfers, and then we have their total net budget of $606 million for FY22. And I would point out quickly that they did take some subsequent action to the preparation of this document, so there's going to be some reconciliation between the two documents. They received some additional state funding, and that is not included in these figures, so I just want to make sure that I pointed that out to council. Moving over to the CIP quickly, this is a tabular view of the 5-year CIP by category. As you can see from this table, the education section is the largest section of the CIP, the 5-year program, at over $173 million. The second largest section is public utilities, and the third largest section is our transportation section. And again, this next slide, I'd just like to show you two different views of the same data sometimes. Sometimes the tabular view speaks to people, sometimes the pie chart speaks to people. Just wanted to show you the same information, just kind of a different way, so you can see those proportional amounts going to each section of the CIP. So Chris mentioned this earlier, but something that we've done this year in the CIP, we've done a couple of things differently. Obviously, the timing of the CIP, but one of the things that they stressed to me as I took this position was it was critical to ensure that our CIP was aligned to the comprehensive plan. So each CIP sheet, and I call them project detail sheets, it's simply in the document, each project has its own individual detail sheet where you can see the funding and the description, the scope of the project. We've added 2 new designations to each project. The first being the comprehensive plan goal that the project aligns to, and then the second being the planning area that the project exists in within the city. So obviously for some projects, they are not geographic in nature, so they will have a citywide designation. So you may see that. So with that, I'm going to come back in just a few minutes and talk about revenue, but we have a really exciting new tool that we're rolling out with the FY22 CIP. We think that hopefully citizens are really going to like this and council's going to like this. So I'd like to ask Virginia Fowler to go through a demonstration of our new CIP mapping tool.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone. As part of the CIP preparation this year, Jonathan expressed an interest in geolocating the projects to provide that extra layer of information and the where, if you will, and also to align it, as they've repeatedly mentioned, to the comprehensive plan, as well as the, so the planning area becomes a very important element of the capital project preparation. So the end result is this capital project review dashboard. It is a configuration presented through the ESRI local government solutions that we have capitalized on as part of our investment that we continue to make in ArcGIS Enterprise and our ESRI and geospatial platform. So there's several projects that feed into this that allow departments to develop their own plans and then kind of bubble those up to be evaluated by the Budget Review Committee. So this is the view you would see if you were sitting on the Budget Review Committee, and also when it gets presented to you all after they have approved the projects. So there, of course, the center stage is the map here, and the projects are color-coded by section. So you can see the different colors down here in this chart, but there's also a legend that will show you, and they are the different budget types. And then you can also see the planning areas. They're sort of in the background as grade. You are able to search by project name, because I've mapped the city for 11 years, and I'm not exactly sure where Weiss Lane is. So you can always type that in, and you can go in and drill down further and see where the Weiss Lane widening project is. When you zoom in, the project brings up this little kind of like snapshot of the different information, the details, the estimated cost, and also it breaks it out by the monies allocated by fiscal year. Then there's you can just go home and see them all. So on the right here is a full list of all projects. We currently have 270 capital projects mapped. The sum total of the cost is down here in the towards the bottom. And if you want to learn more about the different projects, you just click and zoom, and the map filters. There's another application for the review committee that when you click on this Review Now button, drills down, and they're able to actually go in and change the status as to whether they approve it or not and want it to be bubbled up further in the process. Over here on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side under Type, if you want to see all your economic development project types, we'll zoom those out. And it also, when you change things on the left-hand side here, it filters your costs down here in your project type in your cost chart. And then now you see we have 11 capital projects under the economic development heading. And it's all toggle, so you uncheck it and you get all of yours back. And then you can also filter by the fiscal year start, so any project that would start in fiscal year 25. So this, and because we're at the city view, that's why the main map right now doesn't really show it, so it's better to see the list that there's 11, because, tiny little, smaller polygons at the size of the city of Chesapeake, 343 square miles, is kind of hard to see sometimes. But that's why if you want to see the Cedar Road widening, you can zoom in further. And again, we untoggle that guy and we see them all. So we have yet to implement funding source, but that is an option to us. As far as status goes, they're all currently set to the executive approval status because they have been, they've made it through the budget review committee and are being presented to council. When you all give the okay, then they become board authorized, and that moves them into the phase of being able to be displayed to the public solution, and that is still under development, so baby steps. You can also go back and see, you can distinguish between existing CIP projects, or if you're only interested in ones that have been newly proposed. And then again, we've added a toggle here at the bottom so that the filters build on each other. So if you wanted to see new projects that have been geolocated, there are 12. So geolocated meant that it applied to a very specific location in the city, and we were able to digitize that, draw basically a polygon representing the project scope. If they are a citywide project, we tried to assign it to where the department lives. So for like the voter registrar here, for their voting equipment, we assigned it to the building where the voter registrar is located. And all of this is completely customizable, configurable, and I'm sure Jonathan would love to hear feedback. So I will take you back to the regular presentation. Okay. We don't want to start from beginning.
No, we don't.
We don't. Heath, you assured me there was a start from last slide. Shall I turn it for you? And I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Virginia. So obviously, this is a tool that really IT has had the heavy lift here. We've just supplied the data, and they've done a lot of hard work to get this to this point. We are hoping that as we continue to grow this tool, we will be able to update the information as if someone brings a project to City Council for an amendment or for a new appropriation, we would be able to amend the project description within this tool. So it's kind of real time. When you have the document, everything's kind of static, but we're looking to do something more real time again to bring that transparency to the public and also allow them to look at the projects of interest to them and areas of interest to them and get all the information instead of from a static sheet from a more dynamic tool. So that's the hope. So thank you, Virginia. All right, so I'm going to talk just briefly about revenue and then turn it back over to Chris for some closing comments. So total revenue, again, this is looking citywide, city and school total budget. Again, $1.26 billion for FY22. Obviously, you'll notice that the largest individual source of revenue is general property tax. That includes your real estate tax as well as your personal property tax. And that's almost 1/3 of the total budget comes from that source. And again, just showing you that same data in the pie view again, so you can see the proportionality of each of the revenue sources as they make up the total city budget. Looking more specifically at the general fund, the total general fund budget for FY22 is $677.4 million. And when looking at the revenue by source for the general fund, you note that the general property tax actually makes up more than 50% of the funding for the general fund. And again, that's your real estate tax, your personal property tax. So looking more specifically at the real estate tax, this slide shows the real estate tax from FY20 to from FY17 to FY20, actual collections, and then also looks at FY21 and FY22 on a budgetary basis. Again, you note the impacts of COVID there as the estimated revenue for FY21 is reduced from the actual collections in 20. When we get to the end of the fiscal year, again, based on what we're seeing right now in terms of revenue collection, we don't think that this is how it will end. We think it will be above what we estimated back last year as we prepared the budget. But we are showing substantial growth for FY22 based on the real estate assessor's projections. Wanted to point out that the orange portion of the line is the general fund, while the maroon portion at the top is other funds. So looking at some of the dedications that City Council has made of the real estate tax, the council has a number of dedications. Two of the more significant dedications are the two TIF districts that the city has, the South Norfolk TIF as well as the Greenbrier TIF. Council has also dedicated about $271,000 a year of the real estate tax to the OSAP program. And then you've also dedicated 1 cent to 1 cent individually to the city and school lock boxes. And for FY22, that will equate to about $2.77 million to both of the lock boxes. Looking at our consumer-driven revenues, a similar story, same time horizon for this graph, looking at actual collections from FY17 to FY20. Again, for FY21, we reduced our projection on general sales tax due to COVID. We really did not know what the economy would do. Fortunately, people kept buying toilet paper and other necessities, and sales tax continued to perform well. It continues to perform well. So we really feel like this revenue is going to help us to afford some of those investments that I talked about earlier in the presentation as it continues to perform well. Another revenue source that we were concerned about in FY21 was the meals tax. You can see that the estimate for this tax was dramatically lowered for FY21. Restaurants were closing, but people find ways to get food. So you had the emergence of DoorDash and a lot of these other companies that will bring food to you, and their rates are actually a touch higher. So our meals tax revenue has continued to perform well, better than we had hoped. And again, in FY22, we believe we'll see some growth in that revenue source. Switching over to schools, this is the revenue for the school's operating fund. I just point out on this graph that the two most significant sources of revenue to the schools are state revenue as well as the contribution from the city through the revenue sharing formula, which we talked about earlier. Again, I just would remind council that this is not based on the final adopted budget from the schools. That happened very late in the process, and we've already received a letter from them saying that they have got some additional state funding coming to them from the budget that was adopted by the state, so that would need to be incorporated. And then looking at school revenue by fund, again, I would point out that the schools are requesting to have a new fund established, the school athletic fund, which they are requesting $9.2 million. A significant part of that request is for reversion and revenue true-up funding from FY20 that they want to use to seed that new fund. Moving quickly to the CIP. The sources of funding for the CIP are shown here. The capital budget year one totals $121.9 million. And the total 5-year program is over $556 million. In terms of the sources of funding, the largest single line on this table is general obligation bonds. However, there are numerous cash sources of funding go by different names. The city lockbox and the school lockbox are obviously fund to balance. And enterprise fund cash from the TIF funds. So when you add up all the cash sources, they are actually greater than the GO bonds, even though bonds in terms of one individual line looks to be the greatest. If you add up those cash sources, most of our CIP is still financed with cash over the 5-year program. And that's all that I have, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Price.
Thank you, Jonathan. As we close this out, the way we started, anchoring back to council's vision and strategic priorities. And if you recall, I believe it was the July retreat, we had big issues on the horizon. And I had a list, you all added to that list a little bit. And so we wanted to provide you with a scorecard of where are we making progress on these big issues, where do we still have some work to do. As you'll see, the check marks is where we're making significant progress or completing projects. Some of them are ongoing projects. And then the ones with X's are ones that are largely unaddressed, although we're going to talk about a plan for how to address those. So running quickly through these, making great places, making Chesapeake an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play is found throughout the budget. So many of the initiatives that we're proposing are connectivity issues, physical, social, technological, community development initiatives, economic development initiatives. I think we're really moving the ball incrementally, but in a significant way on community development initiatives. Implementing classification and compensation study. Jonathan mentioned we'll be doing the study that council requested throughout this year, and we've added capacity, not yet knowing what the recommendations are, but added capacity to address the recommendations so that we can begin immediately upon study completion. Road maintenance, I've talked to you a lot, and we talked to you at the November retreat about the significant backlog of road maintenance projects here within the city of Chesapeake. So our roads were largely built in the boom years of the 80s and 90s. We do not have a significant fund capitalized to be maintaining those roadways. So even as new roads are coming online, we have a very significant gap in maintaining the roads we already have. And so we've made significant progress towards addressing that gap. Jonathan mentioned the Public Works, Public Utilities facility. Significant improvements in technology infrastructure and stormwater infrastructure, addressing our city facilities and space needs and security for our employees and security for our visitors, of course. But then there's some issues left to be addressed. And so process moving forward. Obviously, through the 2 retreats and through my first year here with the city, we've talked a lot about a lot of priorities. And as you just saw, we're making progress on a lot of those priorities. But there's some huge priority items that aren't largely addressed in the budget or maybe in their infancy with some seed money in the budget. And so I just want to go through some of those because these represent really significant choices moving forward. Number 1 is the Chesapeake Connects. This is the local broadband ring. This is our most, even though it's not a traditional utility, it's our most important utility project that we believe we should advance. And it has really, there probably is no more important project to accelerate Chesapeake becoming an exceptional place to live, learn, work, farm, and play. So over the coming weeks, we want to work with you on some ways that we think we can begin to make significant progress on this. Similarly, the public safety training facility, I believe if it was not unanimous, and I think it was unanimous at the November retreat, that this was the number 1 capital facility need that we identified. So again, a little bit of money in the CIP to address this, not nearly enough. So we want to talk to you about some ways that we think we can make progress to address this as quickly as possible. Site readiness, our number one economic development priority is getting sites prepared and ready so we can strike quickly on economic development opportunities. I know you all have seen those ranking lists that the state has when the state economic development professionals are selling sites in Virginia. And we have some good candidate sites in Chesapeake. We want to make them great candidate sites. And so we want to identify some resources to really accelerate that site readiness program. Strategic land acquisition. You all have had requests seems like every year, and they'll continue, whether it was the Newton Neck property, Great Bridge Waterways Museum property. We had the Riddick property that we council purchased to accelerate the Deep Creek Bridge project. There are always opportunities as properties come available for strategic acquisition, and we'd like to find a way to work with you to capitalize a fund for strategic land acquisition. The rebranding initiative. So at the conclusion of the next retreat with council later this spring, we want to share with you the results of the branding project, which is really taking a hard look at our vision of who we want to be, our existing brand, our recognition in the marketplace, and what we can do to improve our brand recognition in the places where we compete, particularly in economic development, but also here locally. And then a few weeks ago, you had a presentation from the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways Museum about a significant capital project that they'd like to undertake. There is no money identified in my proposed budget for that project. But again, if that's one of council's priorities, we have some ways that we'll talk to you over the next few weeks that we think you can advance that and other projects. Other emerging issues that you've been hearing about, increased costs related to adult detention at the regional jail and here at our local jail, and increased tipping fees. This is becoming a very, very significant issue for a variety of reasons, including the reasons we talked to you last year about the collapse in the recycling markets. That's not gotten any better. So we're going to be talking to you in the coming weeks about this issue and some things we think we can do to address it. And then lastly, although this is a huge list of needs, there are policy levers that you have available to you that you can pull to really make progress on these choices. And it's conversations that, from my look back in history, I'm not sure that we've had in-depth conversations with council about the choices you have available to you to make progress on these items. So addressing these items and giving you choices on how to address the items will really be how we spend the next few weeks of work sessions as we get from today through ultimately budget adoption. So with regards to closing thoughts, I hope that you see that this budget is beginning what will be a multi-year journey to align where we are today to where you're trying to go. As you know, we're a $1.2 billion organization with 4,000 employees, serving 250,000 residents, 100,000 businesses, and millions of travelers and visitors every year. And you don't change that on a dime. But I believe that we are very mindful of where council and the community wants to go, and we have made significant progress towards realigning the organization to achieve council's priorities. I also hope that you can see transparency. So it starts with helping you make those choices, and it starts with presenting information in a way that the community can see what's the impact of those choices. And I hope that we've done that on the operating budget side of the house in terms of tying things back to your strategic priorities, and on the capital budget side of the house in terms of tying those projects back to the strategic plan. So next steps, in April, we'll get back at it and have a series of work sessions. On April 13th, we'll be talking about council's reserve policies and police speeding cameras, some new legislation that we may choose to take advantage of. On April 20th, we'll have another discussion about waste and recycling services and a real estate tax supplement process that can add some capacity to do some different things without assessing any new taxes or fees. here in the community. And then on April 27th, we'll address the stormwater program. Councilmember Best asked for a comprehensive overview of where we're at, and we want to make sure we do that in time for you to begin to address anything that comes up in that work session and start to make progress towards that in this budget session. So with that, the budget is now council's. It's out of the city manager's hands and in your hands, but as always, happy to answer any questions or comments, and I certainly look forward, as I know Jonathan and the entire team does, to working with you as we move through the adoption process.